Hey YouTube. So with this whole coronavirus thing, I have a lot of time on my hands, and I thought, well, why don't we just take some stuff apart and talk about it a little bit and see what's going on. Here before me is a Cooler Master. It's a little cube case, and if you look at my channel, you'll see I'm kind of fond of these things, like being able to have a PC-driven media center in every room where people might want to watch TV. So I really enjoyed this particular build. We're going to see some repeat visitors from other builds that I liked, and we're going to see some new spins. One of the things that's really cool about this case is, even though it technically is a mini ITX case, there is a way to take and make this into a Micro-ATX case with qualifications. And we'll get into that a little bit, and we'll talk about how that all rolls. Okay, team, so here is front of the case up here. Here is a little bump out here. That's where the power supply will actually slide into that hole there. And this build is really compact. The particular board in this case is the Asrock J3455M. I have another machine that I've built up with that particular board in it. I liked it so much I upgraded an old BioStar board in this for this particular TV build. The case is newer too, so kind of a case and everything. So let me just talk about how I got this technically Micro-ATX board to fit into this mini ITX case. So here we've got the I/O panel, and then we have two expansion card slots right here. But if you'll notice, over here, the case doesn't stop right here where many other ITX cases stop. There's actually a fair amount of distance. So one of the modifications to do this was to take, there was a little black rivet right there that I drilled out, and then on the bottom there is another rivet right there, and then another rivet right there. What happens is this piece of side material here loosens up a little bit, and you can wiggle and move it just enough so that the board will sit in flush with this edge right in here. So as you can see, I do already have the board populated into the case. It does have 3 PCI Express slots, an X1 where I have a serial ATA riser card, and then an X16 slot, but this one is only an X1 bandwidth slot, so it'll physically take X16 cards, and then of course a third slot. Most of your common Micro-ATX boards are going to have 4 slots. I think that's the limit to them. So if this was truly a Micro-ATX board, of course it wouldn't fit. We would be about, 12-15 millimeters too short. But again, let's just pan over a little bit here. Just love the layout of this board. You've got your passively cooled CPU, 2 slots for RAM, and I did find some black heat spreader RAM here, kind of like that. So everything's tied up. The nice thing about this case is the fasteners that you get, just to give an example, are all black, just a matte black coating. It just really, it would look kind of silly if you had this nice black case and then silver colored screws. So let's move on with the build a little bit. Here's a close-up of the back side of a double height graphics card here. This is a GeForce GTX 750 Ti. I just love this form factor because it's a little short one and it has no PCI Express connector. But the way you have to do it in this particular case is you have to take and cut down one of these tabs here so it will fit correctly into the case. Otherwise it just won't quite drop all the way into the slot. So let's go ahead and get that installed. Alright team, if I can do this on camera, I'm going to be really happy. Take one. So one of the things you have to worry about is your header for your high definition audio comes way back into this corner here. And nice thing about this case is the PCI Express 16 slot does have a slider. It's not essentially a plastic spring-loaded tab which makes it a little bit easier. But this is a squeeze to get this bad boy in there. So, like I say, if we can do this and not futz around with too much footage, and oh, I think here we go. So, the card is in. I'm going to go ahead and lock the tab there. And let's go ahead and move on. The kit of parts that comes with this case is pretty generous. Here we have some little rubber isolator with screws, little mounts for just a Mushkin reactor, kind of my favorite brand of solid state drive. And to get this in again, we have a little bit of a tight squeeze, and I'm going to hope that I can do this in one take. Here we go. So the clearance between the cover of the drive and the screw holes is pretty snug. There is literally no room left. Here we go. And these screw mounts are pretty slick. You don't have to tighten up a rubber mount too much just as long as it stays put. I'm not planning on doing anything that requires a lot of this case to take a lot of vibration. It's going to be sitting on a TV cart for lack of a better description. So there we go. Alright, so when I put this build together, I ended up having an old power supply that gave up the ghost at some point. So very recently, I picked up this Rosewell 400 watt 80 plus. And it's interesting because in terms of power output of a power supply versus price, it seems like the sweet spot where you can get the best value for money and not have too large of a power supply is about 400 watts. Of course, this is probably 300 watts too large for this system. And someday I do want to try a Pico PSU, the kind that has essentially an AC to DC inverter on a circuit board, rather than a standard switching type power supply. So let's see if we can go ahead and get this thing installed. Okay, here we go. I'm going to put the 24 pin connector in here. If I can do this in one take, I'm going to feel really good about myself tonight. Maybe we can go up and have another aviation gin. That would be kind of sweet. So, and here we go. Again, the board, being a low power board, does not have a P4 connector in it, just the 24 pin board power. And there's that little hump back there on the back of the case in action. Literally can rest the power supply in there, and it's the standard what everyone expects, the whole 4-screw mount. It's interesting, this case, they didn't move the power supply any further forward, but I'm sure that was a design consideration, I guess, possibly to have accommodations for maybe a slightly larger power supply. Really not certain. It doesn't really break up the case because this hump is on the back side of the case, so you just never see it if it's installed face forward, of course. So we'll go ahead and get the rest of the screws on and tighten them up. Alright, got all the power supply screws in. While I'm at it, probably should go ahead and tie down the graphics card here. I knew that would happen. Alright, I'm leaving that last bit in. Ha! Figure there's this guy on YouTube who's a total butterfingers dropping multi-$1,000 parts. All y'all can see me drop a screw in a case. Yeah, I just turned the case on its side and shook it out. There we go. Yes, the cables are just going to get stuffed into the case because it's a passively cooled CPU. The only thing you really have to make sure of is that there's a little bit of space above it for the heat to radiate or convect off of the little aluminum cooler. So also this fan on the power supply, I think, is probably way more than is needed to ventilate this case effectively. This case comes with a pretty nifty bracket and some really low profile screws so that you can mount your drives. Here I have a couple of just very large, or fairly large platter drives for storing media. I'd have to say though, I'm actually a little surprised. We switched over to watching YouTube TV a month or two ago, and you don't really record on YouTube TV like you would on Windows Media Center, so it's really not even possible to record things. The only thing I would do is possibly use these to download videos off of thumb drives, optical media, whatnot. Although I say that, I should also put a caveat that there is no optical drive in this system. So it would have to be where I'd have to transfer those files across a network or something like that. So, but here we go. We're going to go ahead and install this. Specifications for this case suggest that it can accept 3 standard-sized hard drives, and if you look at the bracketry right here, you could put a regular-sized hard drive here. Of course, I couldn't because the graphics card would be in the way. But on the top, you definitely have, again, for this fancy bracket here, you definitely have some different hole patterns and whatnot, so you could use the standard 2.5 solid-state drive everywhere if you so chose. So it's just a strap here that goes across the top and secures with 4 screws. Okay, so having manually inserted the screws, we're going to go ahead and just tighten these down. And the last thing, of course, is to hook up the signal and power to each of the drives. That power supply definitely has plenty of serial ATA connectors, and I like this. The case came with a couple of black serial ATA data connectors here. Here we go. So, just about there, aren't we? This case, rather than having a side panel, has what I would call a doghouse, and it's just a 3-sided formed piece of sheet metal. Of course, the really interesting thing about this is it's essentially holes and mesh everywhere. I would imagine if someone wanted to put a Micro-ATX board with a high-powered graphics card in this system, they would not have any issues cooling it. The only challenge would be, of course, would be the length of that graphics card. So we're going to go ahead and install it. There are 4 ridges on this case. It's essentially a formed piece of metal that will actually grab and clasp the case. And so it adds some rigidity to the cover, adds some rigidity to the overall case. Let's go ahead and get that installed. So here we go. The cover is most at home when you have it with about 1 inch to go, and you just slide it on and make sure that the edges are lined up. And the finishing touch, again, more matte black thumb screws to tie this all together. I'm sure you don't want to watch me tighten screws. Okay, YouTube, just want to point out there's that one rivet that you have to drill out. There is another rivet up high up here that you do not have to drill out, and again, that piece of sheet metal can flex when you get the main board in. Not a big deal. So here we have the Cooler Master case with a double slot graphics card and a Micro-ATX board inside of the Mini ITX case. And here's the usage model here. Just a little 32-inch LCD, perfect for the small room that it's in. So Team YouTube, I've been playing around with the J3455M board in another application where I needed to do a VPN through work, and I would definitely say this: the VPN, even with that GTX 750 Ti graphics card to take a load off the CPU for graphics processing, not the most powerful processor. It is indeed a quad core, but I did have some slowdowns even with a solid state drive trying to do some stuff through work, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't the VPN. So just a caveat, high-powered CPU processing for this particular setup, probably not a thing. But here we are, this nice little LCD TV, casual viewing. Of course, what else are we going to watch? We're going to watch YouTube. Have a great night.